My name is Olivia. I'm 68 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood my place in the world. I was wrong. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening, one of those evenings that feel ordinary until they aren't. I had spent most of the afternoon cooking. Not because anyone asked me to, but because that's what I've always done. Cooking was how I showed love. It was how I kept a home alive. The table was set the same way it had been for decades. Same plates, same silverware, same wooden surface my late husband and I had picked out together when we first moved into this house. That table had seen birthdays, arguments, laughter, apologies a lifetime. And yet, that night, I didn't belong at it. We had barely started eating when she said it. Olivia, your voice is it's irritating tonight. Could you finish your dinner upstairs? We need some quiet. Her tone was casual, polite even, as if she were asking me to pass the salt. For a moment, I thought I misheard her. I looked at my son, Ethan, 40 years old, sitting right across from me. The boy I raised, protected, sacrificed everything for. He didn't look at me. He just kept cutting his food. That silence hurt more than her words. Of course, I said quietly. My hands were steady, but something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture, like glass under pressure. I picked up my plate and stood. No one stopped me. As I walked out of the dining room, I heard her again, light, satisfied. Thank you. We just need to talk business. Business. That word echoed in my head all the way up the stairs. I sat on the edge of my bed with the plate in my hands. The food I had spent hours preparing tasted like nothing. Dry. Empty. Like chewing paper. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. That I was overreacting. That younger people just needed space. But then the tears came. Slow at first. Then unstoppable. Because this wasn't about dinner. This had been building for years. Ever since Ethan married her, Vanessa. At the beginning I tried. I truly did. I welcomed her into this house, into our lives. I wanted my son to be happy. That's all I had ever wanted. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Little comments. Olivia tends to hover, doesn't she? She means well, but she's a bit much. She doesn't understand how things work nowadays. Always said sweetly. Always with a smile. And slowly my son started agreeing. Not openly. Not cruelly. Just enough. Enough to make me question myself. Enough to make me quieter. I stopped sharing my opinions. Stopped telling stories. Stopped being me. Because every time I did, I felt like I was intruding. In my own home. That night, sitting alone in my bedroom, something inside me finally changed. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. Because for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. How did I become invisible in my own life? The next morning, I made a decision. A small one. I called my lawyer. Not because I had a plan. Not yet. But because my husband had always handled our finances, and after he passed, I had avoided dealing with any of it. Numbers felt overwhelming. Cold. Unnecessary. But that day, I forced myself to go. Olivia, I've been meaning to speak with you, my lawyer said as I sat down across from him. There are some important matters you should be aware of. He handed me a folder. I opened it slowly, expecting routine paperwork. What I found instead changed everything. You are the sole trustee now, he explained, which means all financial decisions go through you. I see, I said, though I didn't fully understand yet. He continued, the trust is currently valued at approximately $3 million. I blinked. I'm sorry, how much? Just over $3 million. My hands tightened around the folder. I had no idea. None. My husband had built something quietly, carefully, and left it in my hands. But that wasn't the real shock. The real shock came next. The trust has also been funding several ongoing, family-related investments. My heart skipped. What kind of investments? He flipped a page. There are monthly transfers to a company called V Beauty Group. That belongs to your daughter-in-law, correct? I felt the room shift. Yes, the trust has provided approximately $200,000 over the past 2 years, plus monthly operational support. I couldn't speak. Vanessa's business. The one she proudly claimed she built on her own. The one she constantly stressed about in front of me. It was being funded by my husband's money. By my money. Does my son know? I asked quietly. The lawyer shook his head.
No.
According to your husband's instructions, the funding was meant to remain anonymous. Of course it was. He wanted them to feel independent. He wanted to protect their pride, even after he was gone. But no one had protected me. I sat there as the rest of the information unfolded. Their lifestyle, their comfort, their stability. All of it quietly supported by something they didn't even know existed. And all of it under my control. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't think about dinner, or Vanessa, or even Ethan. I thought about one thing only: power. Not loud power, not cruel power, but the kind that comes from finally understanding your own worth. When I walked into the house, they were at the table again. Laptops open, papers everywhere. Planning, dreaming, living a life built on something they didn't even see. I walked past them. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I needed permission to exist. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision.
A real one this time.
I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg for respect. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was going to act. Quietly. Decisively. They thought I was weak. They thought I didn't understand anything.
They thought I needed them.
They were wrong. And soon they were going to find out just how wrong they were. I didn't rush into anything. That would have been a mistake. For an entire week after meeting with my lawyer, I said nothing. I cooked, cleaned, moved through the house the same way I always had. Quiet. Predictable. Invisible. Vanessa continued treating me like background noise, and Ethan continued pretending not to notice. If anything, their behavior reassured me. I hadn't changed in their eyes. That was important, because while they believed nothing had shifted, everything had. Every morning, I reviewed the documents my lawyer had given me. Numbers that once intimidated me now felt strangely empowering. I learned quickly. Faster than I expected. Years of managing a household had taught me more than I realized, just in a different language. Budgets, planning, priorities, it was all the same, just on a larger scale. And at the center of it all was Vanessa's company. Her pride. Her identity. Her illusion. By the end of that week, I knew exactly what I was going to do. On Monday morning, after Ethan left for work and Vanessa locked herself in the living room for one of her important calls, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. I'd like to make some changes, I said calmly. There was a brief pause on the other end. What kind of changes, Olivia? I want to stop all funding going to V Beauty Group. Effective immediately. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. That's a significant decision. Are you sure? I'm sure. My voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. He explained the technicalities, the procedures, the recommended notice period. I listened carefully, then agreed to the minimum required steps. Within a few hours, the transfers were halted.
Just like that.
No drama.
No announcement.
No warning. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes before something collapses. The rest of the day passed as usual. Vanessa ordered lunch and complained about delays. Ethan came home late. They spoke about expansion plans, investors, opportunities. I listened from the kitchen, unnoticed, drying dishes that were already dry. It almost felt unreal. They were building plans on a foundation that no longer existed. The first crack appeared 3 days later. I was in the hallway when I heard Vanessa on the phone. Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it I heard something new.
Panic.
What do you mean the transfer didn't go through? She said sharply. That's not possible. We've never had issues before. She paced across the room, heels clicking faster with every step. No, check again. There must be a mistake.
A pause.
Then louder. Well, fix it. She ended the call abruptly. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at nothing. Then she noticed me. Olivia, she said, forcing a smile. Have you seen any mail from the bank? I shook my head gently.
No, dir.
Is something wrong? It's nothing, she replied quickly. Just a minor delay. Of course it was. But delays have consequences. By Friday, her tone had changed. The calm confidence she usually carried was gone, replaced by irritation that spilled into everything she did. She snapped at customer service representatives, argued with suppliers, complained about unprofessional behavior from people who, until recently, had been perfectly reliable. Ethan started noticing, too. What's going on? I heard him ask one evening. Nothing I can't handle, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. That night, they argued. Not loudly. Not yet. But enough for me to hear the tension through the walls. It doesn't make sense, Ethan said. Money doesn't just disappear. I know that, Vanessa snapped, which is why I'm trying to figure out what went wrong. Well, maybe we should review everything, accounts, agreements. I already did. Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable, then softer, almost defensive. This kind of thing happens in business. By the second week, the situation escalated. Phone calls became constant. Vanessa barely ate. She spent hours locked in rooms, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Words like liquidity, short-term gap, and unexpected disruption floated through the house like ghosts. I watched quietly, not with satisfaction, but with awareness. Because for the first time, I saw her without the mask. And it wasn't confidence underneath. It was dependency. One afternoon, she lost control completely. Her credit card had been declined at a store. I knew because she came home furious, throwing her bag onto the table. This is ridiculous, she said loudly. There's no reason for this. Ethan looked confused. Did you hit a limit?
No, she snapped.
Something's wrong with the accounts. He frowned. Then call the bank. I already did. She turned away, running her hands through her hair. For the first time since I had known her, she looked uncertain. That night, something interesting happened. Ethan came into the kitchen while I was making tea. He hesitated before speaking. Mom, do you think businesses can just lose funding suddenly? I looked at him carefully. It depends, I said. Sometimes things aren't as stable as they seem. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess. He lingered for a moment, as if he wanted to say more. But then he didn't. He never did. The real shift came a few days later. I was upstairs when I heard Vanessa's voice, sharper than usual. We need to consider other options, she said. Like what? Ethan asked. Alone. There was a pause. Alone, he repeated. From who? She didn't hesitate. Your mother. I froze. The air around me felt suddenly very still. Mom, Ethan sounded unsure. She doesn't have that kind of money. How do you know? Vanessa replied quickly. She's been living here for decades. Your father worked his whole life. There has to be something. She lives modestly, he said. You've seen that. Exactly, Vanessa said. which means she has savings. There it was. Not concern, not respect, calculation. I stood there, listening as she continued. If she won't give us money, she can at least co-sign. Banks trust people like her. Stable, older homeowners. Low risk. Low risk. I almost smiled. If only she knew. Ethan hesitated. I don't know. I don't want to pressure her. This isn't pressure, Vanessa insisted. This is family helping family. Family. Such a convenient word. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was upset, but because everything had become clear. They hadn't just taken me for granted. They had already decided what I was worth to them. A resource. A backup plan. Something to use when needed. The next morning, Ethan knocked on my door.
Softly.
Like he used to when he was a child. Mom, can we talk? I opened the door and smiled gently. Of course. He looked nervous. It's about Vanessa's business. They're having some trouble, and we were wondering if maybe you could help. I nodded slowly. What kind of help? Well, maybe co-sign a loan. Just temporarily. I looked at him for a long moment. At my son.
My boy.
The one who didn't know that I had already given them everything. How much? I asked. Maybe 50,000, he said. Such a small number. Compared to what they had already used. Compared to what they had already lost. I'll think about it, I said calmly. Relief flooded his face. Really? Yes, I said. I'll need some time. But I already knew my answer. I just wasn't ready to give it yet. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about truth. And very soon, they were going to hear it. I didn't say yes to the loan, and I didn't say no either. I told Ethan I needed a few days to think, and that was the truth, but not for the reason he believed. I wasn't weighing the risks of helping them. I was deciding how much more I needed to know before I made my next move. Because something about Vanessa's reaction, her sudden desperation, the cracks in her confidence, it didn't feel like this was just about money anymore. It felt deeper. And I've lived long enough to trust that feeling. So instead of sitting at home pretending to think, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed how often Vanessa left the house now. Always with urgency. Always with a reason that sounded important, but never specific. Client meeting. Investor lunch. Strategy session. The words changed, but the pattern didn't. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Always in the afternoon. Always dressed a little sharper than necessary. Always coming back either irritated or strangely energized. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that I was becoming suspicious because of everything that had happened. But then I remembered something my husband used to say, patterns don't lie, people do. That stayed with me. And then 2 days later, I got a phone call. It was an old acquaintance, someone who had known my husband for many years. Her name was Carol. We hadn't spoken in a while, but she had always been observant, the kind of woman who noticed things others overlooked. Olivia, she said gently, I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue, but there's something I think you should know. Something in her tone made me sit down. What is it? I wasn't sure whether to say anything, she continued, but after what I heard about how things have been at your house, I think you deserve the truth. My heart tightened. What truth? There was a pause. Not long, but heavy. Vanessa wasn't honest about her past. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What do you mean? She's been married before, Carol said carefully. To a man named Daniel Hayes. Wealthy family. Lived in Connecticut. I said nothing. I just listened. The marriage didn't last long, she continued. But that's not the part that matters. I gripped the edge of the table. What happened? Carol exhaled slowly, as if choosing her words with care. She moved into his family home after the wedding. His mother lived with them, elderly, not in the best health. Within months, Vanessa had convinced Daniel that his mother needed constant supervision, that she was becoming forgetful, unstable. My stomach turned.
No, i whispered.
Yes, Carol said quietly. And little by little, she took control. Finances, decisions, access to information. She positioned herself as the one in charge. I could barely breathe. It didn't stop there, she continued. Money started moving. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. All justified as expenses for care, improvements, investments. And the mother? I asked. She tried to speak up, but no one believed her at first. Vanessa made her sound confused, emotional, difficult. I closed my eyes. The parallels were too clear, too familiar. What changed? I asked. Daniel eventually noticed inconsistencies. Accounts didn't add up. Documents didn't make sense. When he started digging, everything unraveled. I swallowed hard. And Vanessa? She denied everything, Carol said. Claimed misunderstandings, accused the mother of being unstable. But the evidence was there. Silence filled the space between us. Olivia, she said softly, I'm telling you this because I've seen this pattern before, and I'm afraid you might be in the middle of it now. I didn't respond immediately, because deep down, I already knew she was right. After the call, I sat there for a long time, not crying, not panicking, just thinking. Everything started to make sense. The subtle comments, the isolation, the way Ethan had slowly distanced himself from me, the way Vanessa positioned herself as the reasonable one, the necessary one. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, calculated, and I had walked right into it. But there was more. That same afternoon, something else happened. Vanessa left the house again, earlier than usual. She seemed rushed, distracted. She didn't even notice me watching from the window. And for a moment, I considered following her. The thought surprised me. It wasn't something I would normally do. It felt intrusive, almost wrong. But then I remembered everything Carol had said. And suddenly, it didn't feel wrong at all. It felt necessary. I didn't follow her all the way. I didn't need to. Because sometimes, confirmation comes in unexpected ways. Later that evening, while Vanessa was in the shower, her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I wasn't looking for it. I truly wasn't. But it was there. And the message appeared clearly on the screen. Same time tomorrow? I'll book the room. No name. Just a number.
But I didn't need more than that.
I stepped back immediately. My heart was beating faster now, not from fear, but from something sharper. Clarity. Because now, I wasn't just dealing with someone manipulative. I was dealing with someone who was lying to my son. Using him. Using us. That night, I listened more carefully than ever. Vanessa talked about investors again. About opportunities. About solutions. Ethan listened. Trusted. Believed. And I sat there, watching the gap between truth and illusion grow wider with every word she spoke. By the next morning, I had made another decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. And I wasn't going to tell Ethan immediately either. Because this kind of truth needed to be undeniable. So I started gathering everything. Not just suspicions. Not just feelings.
Facts.
Patterns. Proof. I reviewed financial records again, this time with a different perspective. Certain payments stood out. Consulting fees that didn't match any real service. Dates that aligned perfectly with her meetings. Amounts that were just high enough to avoid suspicion, but consistent enough to form a pattern. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. And the more I uncovered, the calmer I became. Because fear comes from uncertainty. And I wasn't uncertain anymore. By the time Ethan came home that evening, I was ready for the next step. Not the final one, but the one that would begin to change everything. He found me in the kitchen. Like always. Mom, he said, have you thought about the loan? I turned to him slowly. Yes, I said. He waited. Hopeful. Unaware. I have, I repeated. But before I give you an answer, there are some things you need to understand. He frowned slightly. What things? I looked at him carefully. At my son. At the man who had been slowly pulled away from me without even realizing it. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel powerless. Sit down, I said quietly, because what I'm about to tell you,
I paused,
is going to change everything you think you know. Ethan didn't argue when I told him to sit down. That alone told me something had already started shifting inside him. Maybe it was the stress, maybe the tension in the house, or maybe, just maybe, some part of him had begun to notice the cracks I had been seeing for weeks. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had quietly fallen apart, and for the first time in years, he looked at me like he was actually listening. I didn't rush. I had learned that rushing makes people defensive. And I didn't need him defensive, I needed him to see. Before we talk about any loan, I said calmly, you need to understand what's really been happening. He frowned slightly. Mom, what do you mean? I reached for the folder I had prepared earlier and placed it gently on the table between us. My hands were steady. That surprised me again. A few weeks ago, this conversation would have terrified me. Now it felt necessary. This, I said, is about Vanessa, and about your life, and about mine. He leaned forward, confusion turning into concern. You're starting to worry me. You should be, I replied quietly. I opened the folder and slid the first document toward him. It wasn't dramatic, just a simple record. A marriage certificate. Not his. He looked down at it, then back at me. What is this? Vanessa was married before, I said. He blinked.
What?
No, she told me she wasn't. I know what she told you. He picked up the paper, reading more carefully now. I watched his expression change, slowly, subtly.
Confusion. Doubt.
The beginning of something heavier. This could be a mistake, he said quickly. There could be another person with the same name. There isn't, I said gently. Keep reading. I handed him the next document, then another. Not all at once.
Piece by piece.
I let him process each one instead of overwhelming him. That was important. Truth lands harder when people arrive at it step by step. She lived with her husband's family, I continued. His mother was elderly. Within months, Vanessa had taken control of the household. Ethan's jaw tightened. Okay, but that doesn't mean. She convinced him his mother was unstable. I said, my voice still calm, that she needed supervision, that she couldn't be trusted. He went quiet, and then the money started moving. He looked up sharply. Money. Yes. I showed him the financial summaries. Not everything, just enough. Small transfers at first, I explained. Then larger ones. All justified. All explained. All controlled. That doesn't prove anything, he said, but there was hesitation now. Maybe it was legitimate. I nodded. That's what he thought too. At first. I let that sit for a moment. Then I placed the next paper in front of him. A report. Simple. Clear. The investigation showed otherwise, I said. Ethan stared at it longer this time. He didn't argue immediately. That was new. The silence between us grew heavier. Finally, he spoke, but his voice was quieter. Why are you telling me this? I held his gaze. Because I think the same thing has been happening here. That hit him.
Hard.
He leaned back slightly, shaking his head. No, that's not, Mom. That's a serious accusation. I know. And you think Vanessa, Is what? Manipulating me? I think she's been shaping your perception, I said carefully. Little by little. Not in ways you would notice right away, but enough to change how you see things. How you see me. He didn't respond, because he couldn't. Not yet. I stood up and walked to the counter, giving him space to think. Pressuring him now would only make him shut down. I had learned that the hard way over the past few years. After a moment, I continued, but softer. Ethan, when was the last time you defended me? That question hung in the air. He looked down. I didn't think, he started, then stopped. I know, I said. You didn't think you needed to. Then I turned back to him. But that's not all. He looked up again, wary now. What else? I took a breath. This is about her present too, not just her past. His expression hardened slightly. What do you mean? I walked back to the table and placed a small stack of printed transactions in front of him. Look at the dates, I said.
He did.
And now think about when she's usually out of the house. He frowned, scanning the pages again. Tuesdays, Thursdays. His voice slowed. Realization was starting to form. These are payments, he said. Consulting fees? That's what they're labeled as. He looked up. And they're not. I held his gaze.
No.
For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, very quietly, Mom, what are you saying? I didn't soften it. She's been meeting someone, regularly, and she's been using company money to pay for it. The words landed like a weight. Ethan froze.
Completely.
No, he said after a second. No, that's not possible. I didn't want to believe it either, I replied. You're wrong, he insisted, but there was no strength behind it. There has to be another explanation. Then find one, I said gently. But look at the evidence first. He stared at the papers again. Longer this time. His hands tightened slightly. I could see it happening, the shift from denial to doubt, and from doubt to something much more painful. I need air, he said suddenly, standing up. I didn't stop him. He walked to the window, running his hands through his hair. The same gesture he used as a child when he couldn't solve something. Only this time, the problem wasn't simple. I trusted her, he said quietly. I swallowed. I know. We stood there in silence for a while. Then, after what felt like a long time, he turned back to me. Is that everything? He asked. I hesitated, because now we had reached the final piece. No, I said. His shoulders tensed slightly. There's one more thing you need to know. I sat back down and opened a different folder. This, I said, is where the money for her business actually came from. He frowned. What do you mean? You think she built it from investors, I continued. From connections. From her own effort. That's what she told me. I know. I looked at him directly. But it's not true. I slid the documents across the table. Trust records. Transfer histories.
Clear.
Undeniable. He looked at them and then at me. Confusion returned, but this time it was deeper. What is this? This is your father's trust, I said quietly. He blinked. What? It's been funding her business for the past 2 years. Silence. Total silence. I didn't know at first. I continued. Your father arranged it before he passed. He wanted to help you, both of you, without making you feel dependent. Ethan stared at the papers. So, all this time, yes. She didn't know?
No.
And you? I found out recently, I said. He sank slowly back into his chair. Everything was connecting now. The missing money, the sudden collapse, the desperation. The funding stopped, he said quietly. Yes. When? I met his eyes. The day after she told me to eat in my room. That was it. That was the moment everything inside him finally shifted. Not instantly, not dramatically, but completely. We heard the front door open. Vanessa was home. Her voice echoed through the hallway. Ethan? I have news. He didn't move,
Didn't speak.
didn't look away from the table. I stood up slowly. It's time, I said. She walked into the kitchen seconds later, smiling, energized, confident, like nothing had changed. And for the first time, she was the only one in the room who didn't know the truth. Vanessa walked into the kitchen like she owned the moment, like she always did. Her energy filled the room before her words even did, bright, confident, slightly rushed, as if she had already decided how this conversation would go. Ethan, I have incredible news, she said, dropping her bag onto the chair and barely glancing at me. We found a new investor, a serious one. This could fix everything. For a brief second, I almost admired her composure. If I had known the truth, I might have believed her. But now I could see it clearly. This wasn't confidence. It was performance. Ethan didn't respond right away. He was still sitting at the table, the documents spread in front of him like quiet witnesses. His silence caught her attention almost immediately. What's wrong? She asked, her smile tightening slightly. Why do you look like that? He lifted his eyes to her slowly, and I saw something there I hadn't seen in a long time. Not confusion, not avoidance, but awareness. Who is the investor? He asked. His voice was calm, but it had weight now. Vanessa didn't hesitate. Someone Trevor introduced me to, she said quickly. Very private, very selective. He doesn't want his name out there yet, but he's ready to put in serious money, 200,000 to start.
Trevor.
The name hung in the air. I watched Ethan carefully as he processed it. He didn't react immediately, but I could see the connection forming in his mind, linking the name to the receipts, the dates, the patterns. Trevor, he repeated. Your consultant? Yes, she said, a little sharper now. He's been helping restructure things behind the scenes. Honestly, without him, we wouldn't even have this opportunity. I stepped forward slightly, not interrupting, just existing in the space. For once, I wasn't invisible, and she felt it. Her eyes flicked toward me, irritation flashing across her face before she turned back to Ethan. So, she continued, we might not even need your mother's help anymore, but we should still keep that option open, just in case. That was when Ethan finally leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. No, he said. The word was quiet, but it stopped everything. Vanessa blinked. What do you mean, no? I mean, he said slowly, there's not going to be any loan. Not from her. Not from anyone. Her expression shifted instantly. The confidence cracked just slightly. Ethan, this isn't the time to be difficult, she said, forcing a laugh. We're talking about our future. No, he repeated, his voice firmer now. We're talking about lies. Silence dropped into the room like something heavy. What are you talking about? She asked, her tone sharpening. Ethan reached down and picked up one of the papers. This, he said, holding it up slightly. And everything else you didn't tell me. I watched her closely. The moment recognition hit her eyes was almost imperceptible, but it was there. A flicker. A calculation. I don't know what that is, she said quickly. Then let me help you, he replied, placing the paper back on the table. Your previous marriage. Daniel Hayes. Ring any bells? That did it. For the first time since I had known her, Vanessa didn't have an immediate answer. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. That was a long time ago, she said finally. And it's not relevant. Not relevant? Ethan repeated, almost incredulous. You lied to me about it. I didn't lie, she snapped. I just didn't think it mattered. Everything matters, he said, especially when it follows the same pattern. Her eyes narrowed. What pattern? I stepped forward then, calmly placing another set of documents on the table. The one where you move into a household, I said quietly. Gain trust, isolate the person who stands in your way, and take control. She turned to me sharply. You need to stop, she said coldly. You have no idea what you're talking about. I held her gaze.
Ugh, Ida?
Ethan spoke again before she could continue. And what about Trevor? He asked. That landed differently. What about him? She replied, but her voice had lost its edge. The meetings, he said. The payments. The hotel. Now she went completely still. You're tracking me? She said slowly, shifting into defense. I'm paying attention, he answered. That's insane, she snapped. Those are business meetings. At a hotel? He asked. With a consultant, she shot back. With company money, he added. Her composure started to fracture. You're twisting things, she said. You're letting her poison you. There it was.
The shift. Blame.
Redirection. But this time it didn't work. Ethan shook his head slowly. No, he said. I just finally stopped ignoring what's right in front of me. The room felt different now, like something had broken that couldn't be put back together. Vanessa looked between us, searching for control, for leverage, for something she could still use. Then she found her last angle. Fine, she said, her voice dropping into something colder. Even if all of this were true, which it isn't, you still need me. The business, the connections, the future we've been building. None of that works without me. I almost felt sorry for her in that moment. Almost. Because she still didn't understand. Ethan leaned forward slightly. There's no business, he said quietly. She frowned. What are you talking about? I stepped in. There never was, I said. She turned to me sharply. What? The funding you've been relying on, I continued, my voice calm and steady. It didn't come from investors. It didn't come from connections. It came from my husband's trust. Her face went pale. That's not possible, she said immediately. It is, I replied. And it stopped. When? She asked, almost whispering now. I held her gaze. The day after you told me to eat in my room. That was the moment everything collapsed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. She looked at Ethan, searching for disbelief, for denial, for anything. But he wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. Is that true? She asked him. He didn't answer right away, because he didn't need to. The truth was already there. In the silence. In the distance between them. In the way he no longer moved toward her but away. You need to leave, he said finally. Her head snapped back slightly. What? You need to pack your things, he continued, his voice steady now. And leave. You're serious? She asked, disbelief turning into anger. Yes. She laughed, sharp, bitter. You're throwing me out because of her? She said, pointing at me.
No, he said.
I'm asking you to leave because of you. For a moment, it looked like she might fight harder.
Argue.
Manipulate. Twist things one last time. But then something in his expression stopped her. Because for the first time, she realized she had lost control.
Completely.
Without another word, she turned and walked out of the kitchen. The sound of drawers opening, closets shifting, a suitcase being dragged across the floor filled the house for the next 20 minutes. I didn't move. Neither did Ethan. When she finally came back downstairs, she didn't look at either of us. She just walked out, and the door closed behind her. The silence that followed felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, just quiet, real quiet. Ethan sat down slowly, running his hands over his face. I didn't see it, he said quietly. I should have, but I didn't. I sat across from him. You see it now, I said. He nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had my son back. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter, because it had never really been loud, but clearer, like something heavy had finally been removed from the air. I woke up earlier than usual, out of habit, and for a moment I lay there listening. No sharp footsteps in the hallway, no tense phone calls, no forced energy filling the rooms. Just stillness. Real stillness. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel lonely. I got up and went to the kitchen, expecting to be alone, but Ethan was already there, sitting at the table. The same table where everything had changed. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, untouched, and he looked like he hadn't slept much. But when he saw me, something softened in his expression, something familiar, something I hadn't seen in years. "Morning, Mom," he said quietly. "Morning," I replied, just as softly. For a moment, neither of us moved. It wasn't awkward. It was careful, like we were both learning how to exist in the same space again without everything that had been between us. "I made coffee," he added, almost awkwardly, gesturing to the pot. I smiled faintly. "Thank you." I poured myself a cup and sat across from him.
Not at a distance.
Not cautiously, just normally. And that alone felt like progress. "I keep replaying everything," he said after a while, trying to figure out when it started. When I stopped seeing what was right in front of me. I didn't interrupt him. "Was it always like this?" he asked. "Or did it happen slowly?" "Slowly," I said. "That's how these things always happen. If it were sudden, you would have noticed." He nodded, staring down at the table. "I thought I was keeping peace. That if I didn't get involved, things wouldn't escalate." "That's what you believed," I said gently. "But silence isn't neutral. It always takes a side." He closed his eyes briefly, absorbing that. "I let you feel alone in your own home," he said. I didn't even realize it. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You realize it now," I said. "That matters more than anything else." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw something shift again. Not guilt this time, but understanding. "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't long, but it was real. And that was enough. The days that followed weren't perfect, but they were honest. And after everything we had been through, honesty felt like a luxury. Ethan stayed in the house, moving back into his old room while he figured out what came next. At first, it felt strange, like time had folded in on itself, but gradually it became something else. Not regression. Reset. We started doing small things together again.
Cooking.
Grocery shopping. Even just sitting in the same room without tension felt like rebuilding something we had almost lost. One evening, as we prepared dinner side by side, he paused and looked at me. "I don't think I ever said this before," he admitted, "but you were always right about people." I smiled slightly. "Not always. More than I gave you credit for," he said. That mattered more than he probably realized. As for Vanessa, she disappeared from our lives almost completely. There were a few attempts at contact in the beginning, messages, missed calls, vague explanations that avoided responsibility, but Ethan didn't respond. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. Just clarity. He had finally seen who she was, and once you truly see something like that, you can't unsee it. I heard through acquaintances that she had moved to another state, that she was already involved in a new opportunity, a new circle, a new story. It didn't surprise me. People like her don't stop, they just move on to the next place where no one knows their pattern yet. For a brief moment, I considered warning someone, reaching out, saying something. But then I stopped myself. Because the truth is, people only hear warnings when they're ready to listen. And most of the time, they're not. Just like Ethan hadn't been. Just like I hadn't been. The trust remained under my control, but I changed how I used it. Before, it had been invisible support, quiet, unacknowledged. taken for granted. Now it became something intentional, something meaningful. I worked with my lawyer to redirect the funds toward things that actually reflected the values my husband had lived by: scholarships, support programs, assistance for people who had experienced the kind of manipulation I now understood far too well. It felt right, not because it fixed the past, but because it honored it. One evening, a few months later, Ethan and I sat at the table after dinner.
No tensión.
No distance, just conversation. "You've changed," he said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. "In a good way, I hope." He smiled slightly. "In a strong way." I thought about that. "I didn't become stronger," I said after a moment. "I just stopped pretending I was weak." He nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. "The truth is, I didn't win anything. Not in the way people usually think. I didn't get revenge. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't even raise my voice. What I did was simpler than that. I stopped accepting less than I deserved, and everything else followed. Now, when I sit at that same table, the one that holds decades of memories, I don't feel invisible anymore. I don't feel like I need permission to exist, to speak, to take up space. My voice isn't something that needs to be softened or hidden. It's mine, and that's enough. Sometimes I think back to that night, the one where I carried my plate upstairs like I didn't belong, and I realized something important. That moment didn't break me. It revealed me. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this: people will treat you the way you allow them to. Not because they're always cruel, but because boundaries are something you have to create, not something others give you. I lost something over those years.
But I also found something.
Myself. And this time, I'm not giving that up for anyone.